This is question number 11 of forces as vector quantity or resultant forces. Okay, so the question says three coplanar forces of magnitude F Newton, 12 Newton, and 15 Newton are in equilibrium acting at a point P in the direction shown in the diagram. Find alpha and F. Okay, so we see three forces in the figure, and we are told that the forces are in equilibrium. That means their x component should be all the x component should sum up to 0, all the y component should sum up to 0 if the forces are acting in equilibrium. Okay. So what we can do is resolve these forces and get the horizontal component and the vertical component. Now, instead of resolving all instead of resolving this force into its vertical and horizontal component, plus we don't know this angle either, and resolving this force into its vertical and horizontal component, we don't know this angle either. We'll need to get these angles in terms of alpha, and then equating up force equals down force or left forces equals right forces. Instead of doing that, what instead we can do is just resolve P in the direction of 12 Newton force and the F Newton force. What I mean to say is that we can resolve this 15 Newton force in this direction and this direction. So now you'll get vertical forces and horizontal forces by just resolving the 15 Newton force, because one of the component of 15 Newton force is opposite to F Newton and the other one is opposite to 12 Newton. So it's a lot easier to just resolve one force instead of resolving 12 Newton and F Newton into horizontal and vertical components. Okay. So now if you resolve this 15 Newton force into its horizontal and vertical component, you make your job a lot easier. Okay, so this one is going to be 15 cos alpha because it's the adjacent component. And this one is going to be 15 sine alpha because it's the opposite component. Okay, now since the forces are in equilibrium, that means 12 Newton is equals to 15 sine alpha. We'll use this to find alpha, and then F is equals to 15 cos alpha, and we'll substitute that alpha into this equation and get F. Okay, so alpha would be 12 upon 15 sine inverse. Sine inverse of 12 by 15, that gives us 53.1301, rounded to 53.1 degrees. And F comes out to be 15 times cos answer. Fifteen times cos of answer ki 9. Let me check the answer. Yes, F is 9 newtons and alpha is 53.1 degrees. Any questions here? Okay. If not, then we move on to the next question, which is question 12. Four coplanar forces of magnitude 4 Newton, 8 Newton, 12 Newton, and 16 Newton act at a point. The direction in which the forces act are shown in figure 1. Okay, so we're only talking about this figure for now. Find the magnitude and direction of the resultant of the four forces. All right. So see, these four forces are acting in the first quadrant. So there must be some resultant force of these four forces, and then it's going to have some angle here, which is going to be above the positive x-axis. So you need the resultant and you need the theta. Okay. So what do we know about R? R is equals to square root of Rx whole square plus Ry whole square, and theta is equals to tan inverse Ry by Rx. Okay, let's start with Rx. Rx equals forward forces in x direction minus backward forces in x direction. Okay, so we have a 4 Newton force in x direction, forward force in x direction minus backward forces in x direction. Okay, so the forward force is 4 Newton plus there's another forward force in x direction, which is going to be, let me clear this. For x, for 8, we have an 8 cos theta over here. This is going to be 8 cos 30. Okay. So plus 8 cos 30. That's also in forward direction. Then there is the x component of the 12 Newton force, which is going to be 12 cos, now the angle is 60. And these are the four forward forces. So plus 12 cos 60. And there's no backward force in the x direction. So minus 0. This would be the forward force in x direction. So 4 plus 8 cos 30 plus 12 sine 60. Whatever this comes out to be. 4 plus 8 cos 30 plus 12 cos 60 is giving me 16.9282. Ry is going to be forward forces in y direction minus backward force in y direction. Okay. So forward forces in y direction is going to be the upward force, because there is, for the resultant, Ry is upward. So all upward facing y components is the forward facing y forces. Okay, so we have this, which is 8 sine 30. Then we have this, which is 12 sine 60. And then we have a 6 Newton force. Okay. So we get, मुझे ना noise आ रही है background से, so one of you needs to mute their mic. There's a static coming. Chalo, now it's gone. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So Ry would be, there's a 16 Newton upward force. There's a 12 sine 60 upward force. And then there's an 8 sine 30 upward force. And there's no downward y force in this question. So that's going to be 0. Okay. So Ry is coming out to be 16 plus 12 times sine 60 plus 8 times sine 30. That's giving me 30.3923. Okay. So now R would be square root of 16.9282 squared plus 30.3923 squared. So square root of 16.9282 squared plus answer squared. The answer is 34.7887. Which is going to be 34.8 newtons in 3 significant figures. That is the magnitude of the resultant force. That is, all these forces combined exert a force of 34.8 Newton. In which direction? Theta degrees above the x-axis. Let's find theta now. Tan theta equals Ry. Ry is 30.3923 upon 16.9282. Find tan inverse and get the answer, which comes out to be 60.8826. So direction would be, it asks for the magnitude and direction. So direction would be 60.9 degrees. Like we discussed again, resultant is in this direction and theta is here. So it will be 69.9 degrees above positive x-axis or clockwise from the x-axis. 60.9, बल्कि anti-clockwise होगा if it's going upwards. Or 60.9 degree counter-clockwise from positive axis. Oh. So we've stated the magnitude and the direction of figure of the resultant force in figure 1. Part 2 says the forces of 4 Newton and 6 Newton exchange their direction, and the forces of 8 Newton and 12 Newton exchange their direction. State the magnitude and direction of the 4 resultant forces in figure 2. Acha, notice कि figure 1 and figure 2, in both the figures, they're asking for the resultant magnitude and direction, but part 1 is for 5 marks and part 2 is only for 2 marks. So that means you're not expected to do similar working for part 2. क्योंकि फिर वो भी 5 marks का होना चाहिए था अगर हमने exact similar working करनी है कि हम न्यू Rx निकालें, न्यू Ry निकालें और उनसे resultant निकालें पाइथागोरस लगा के और फिर tan inverse लगा के theta निकालें. So that means when you're not expected to do the same thing all over again. ठीक है, so now that means कुछ और करना है. अच्छा, notice कि forces वही हैं. There's a 4 Newton force, there's an 8 Newton force, there's a 12 Newton force, there's a 16 Newton force. बस हुआ ये है कि एक तरह से कह लो कि ये forces reflect हो गई हैं. We had 16, then 12, then 8, then 4. Now it's in the other order. 4, then 8, then 12, then 16. So they're the same forces, but their angles have changed or their directions have changed. That means that the resultant R is going to stay the same. Resultant will stay the same. So without any working, for part 2, you write Resultant equals same answer as before, 34.8 newtons. Same as 1. But what do we do about the theta? In part 1, there was a theta in this direction. This was R, okay? And the theta was 60.9. Let me draw R again. कुछ यहाँ पे होगा 60.9 है तो 60 से बड़ा होगा. So somewhere over here. This is 60.9 degrees. And the magnitude is 34.8 newtons. नोटिस कि ये 60.9 डिग्रीज 4 न्यूटन फोर्स के साथ बन रहा था. तो अब भी जो आपका 60.9 न्यूटन बनेगा ना, वो 60.9 डिग्री बनेगा, वो 4 न्यूटन की फोर्स से ही बनेगा. सो नाउ इट्स गोइंग टू बी इन दिस डायरेक्शन, 60.9 डिग्रीज. ठीक है, 4 न्यूटन के साथ ही बनेगा. सो बिकॉज द फिगर हैज काइंड ऑफ रिफ्लेक्टेड, सो अब आपका एंगल भी रिफ्लेक्ट हो गया. पहले आपका एंगल एक्स एक्सिस के साथ था, अब आपका एंगल वाई एक्सिस के साथ. सो you need to find this angle. So that would be 90 minus 60.9. So 29.1 degrees. और किस डायरेक्शन में? Above positive x axis. बल्कि पॉजिटिव एक्स एक्सिस तो नहीं है इसमें. these are not x and y axis. मैंने गलत लिखा है. I should have written 29.1 degree above the 16 Newton force. 16 Newton force. And also in this first part, fix that please. 60.9 degrees above the 4 Newton force. Because there's no x and y axis in the question. Any questions from question 12? Okay, then we do question 13. A force of F Newton acts in a horizontal plane and has component 27.5 Newton and minus 24 Newton in the x and y direction. तो अब ये फोर्स किस तरह की होनी चाहिए? इसकी x डायरेक्शन जो है that is 27.5 newtons. And then y is negative. That means it's not going up, but it's going down. 24 newtons इस direction में. So the force is in this direction. This is F newtons. Okay. So a force of magnitude F Newton acts in a horizontal plane and has components 27.5 newtons and negative 24 newtons in x and y direction respectively. Achha, now you should be able to find magnitude of F Newton force using Pythagoras. Just a second. Okay. Acha ji. Find, it says the force act at an angle of alpha degree below the x-axis. That means this angle is alpha. Find the value of F in alpha. Okay. So F is simply Pythagoras theorem. F equals square root of 27.5 squared plus 24 squared, which give 36.5 newtons. And similarly, for alpha, we use tan alpha is equals to opposite over adjacent. Take tan inverse, and that should give you the alpha, which is 41.1121, which is 41.1 degrees. Angles in degrees have to be rounded off to one decimal place. Angles in radians have to be rounded to three significant figures. Okay, so we've managed to find F and alpha. So part one is done. A second force of magnitude 87.6 newtons acts in the same plane at 90-degree anti-clockwise from the force of F Newton. Okay, so let's draw this. अच्छा जी. So that's F Newtons. इसके 90 degree पे there's another force now. यूं करके. So a second force of 87.6 newtons acts in the same plane at 90-degree anti-clockwise. Anti-clockwise is this angle, that's why I've made it above F newtons. From the force of magnitude S Newton, the resultant of the two forces has a magnitude of R Newton and makes an angle of theta degree with a positive x-axis. अच्छा जी, अब यहाँ एक positive x-axis भी था, if you remember. ये देखो, ये positive x-axis है. इसको दोबारा बनाते हैं. So there's a positive x-axis here. और उसके नीचे का एंगल अल्फा है, which we've already found. अल्फा क्या आया था? 41.1 degrees. Okay, that means उसके ऊपर का एंगल क्या है? That is going to be 90 minus 41.1 degrees. That is 48.9. Okay. So the resultant of the two forces has the magnitude of R newtons. So in दोनों forces का net effect होगा R newtons. Let me draw that here. ऐसा कोई R newton होगा. And makes an angle of theta above the positive x-axis. So ये angle theta. This angle is going to be theta. Okay. So find the value of R and find the value of theta. अच्छा, F Newton हमें already पता है, it's 36.5 newtons. R is the resultant of these two forces, the red force and the black force. So for R, you're going to simply apply Pythagoras theorem here. R is equals to square root. You know the x component of it, you know the y component of it, क्योंकि बीच में 90 डिग्री का एंगल. So Rx और Ry में भी 90 डिग्री का एंगल होता है. So Rx is already known, 36.5 squared plus Ry is also known, 87.6. Okay. Usually क्या हम कह रहे होते हैं, if this is R, we say this is Rx and this is Ry. But here you already have a 90 degree, you already have the 90 degree components. ये और ये 90 degree के. So you can say this is Rx, and if you draw parallel to the other force, then this is going to be Ry. Okay, so that's also a right angle triangle. So that's why R is equals to Rx, which is 36.5, and Ry, which is 87.6. So you can apply Pythagoras on these two forces. That's done. Okay, now we need theta. सो थीटा के लिए हम क्या करें? You can find this entire angle, यहाँ से लेकर यहाँ तक, using tan, और उसमें से फिर a माइनस कर देंगे तो हमारे पास थीटा आ जाएगा. ठीक है, let's do that. So tan, let's call that angle, इसको कोई और नाम दे देते हैं. अल्फा है, थीटा है, let's call it x. So tan x equals opposite, which is ry, over adjacent, which is rx. So ry है हमारा 87.6. तो यहाँ स्क्वायर नहीं किया, और ये रिजल्टेंट निकालना भी था. रिजल्टेंट आएगा फॉर पार्ट 2 36.5. Sorry, 94.4. Going to be 94.4. Okay, that's the resultant force. And then now we need the angle x first, and then we'll find angle theta. So ry over rx. So इससे x आ जाएगा by taking tan inverse. You get x equals 67.491. But x has both alpha and theta in it. So you can write 41.1 plus theta is equals to this. So then when you subtract, you get theta equals 26.3 degrees. कोई क्वेश्चन है तो प्लीज पूछो.
No.
Then we do the last question of the worksheet, which is question 14. Tomorrow, inshallah, we'll start connected particles. और उसके बाद क्या रह गया? There's momentum, there's kinematics, and there's work, power, and energy. So we have a total of 4 worksheets left. I think it will take us this month of March. Okay. When is your P1 and M1 exam? किसी को पता है? याद है?
मैं सेकंड में और सेवेंथ में.
सेकंड में P1 है, और मैकेनिक्स कब है? 11th में? अच्छा, 7th में.
मैंने सेकंड को और दूसरा सेकंड को.
एक 7th को और दूसरा अजहर समझ नहीं आ रही क्या कह रहे हो. चलो ओके, आई लुक इट अप. अच्छा, तो मई के स्टार्ट में है, दैट मीन्स मार्च में हमारा सिलेबस खत्म होगा और खाली हमारे पास अप्रैल होगा to do the past papers for mechanics extensively. So we'll need to do 1 paper per day, not a few questions per day. Acha ji. A small block of mass 1.25 kg is on a horizontal surface. 3 horizontal forces with magnitudes and directions as shown in the diagram are applied to the block. The angle theta is such that cos theta is equals to 0.28, sin theta is equals to 0.96. A horizontal frictional force also acts on the block, and the block is in equilibrium. Okay, so friction भी act कर रही है, and you're being told कि the system is in equilibrium. That means जो friction है ना, वो balance out कर रही है, balance हो रही है with the resultant of the other three forces. इनका जो भी resultant होगा वो मे बी आई थिंक इसी डायरेक्शन में होगा, बट वी चेक. रिजल्टेंट फिर इस डायरेक्शन में आना चाहिए. So resultant or friction are balancing each other out, or resultant is going to be found from the other, the three forces that we see. Okay. So show that the magnitude of the frictional force is 7.5 Newton. तो आपने क्या show करना है कि friction is equals to the resultant of these three forces, क्योंकि the system is in equilibrium. It's not moving. That means forward or backward force एक दूसरे को balance करिए. Okay. So अब हमने R find करना है, the resultant of the three forces, जो हमें पता है. R के लिए आपको पहले X, Rx find करना होता है और फिर Ry find करना होता है, and then we apply Pythagoras on it. Rx हमें पता है, forward force in X direction minus backward force in X direction. Okay. अभी we're going to ignore this force क्योंकि हम इन तीनों का खाली रिजल्टेंट निकाल रहे हैं. So forward एक तो हो गई 6.1 न्यूटन की फोर्स in the X direction. फिर X direction में इसका component होगा 5 न्यूटन का component होगा. That's going to be the cos component. So this is 5 cos theta. And this one downwards is going to be the sine component, which I'm drawing here, which is going to be 5 sine theta. Acha, since we know what is cos theta and sine theta, either values substitute kar lete. So this is going to be 5 times 0.96, which gives us 5 times 0.96 is 4.8 newtons. So देखो ये भी 4.8 न्यूटन्स है और ये भी 4.8 न्यूटन्स है. तो vertical direction में तो forces are in equilibrium, they're cancelling each other out. अच्छा जी, and this 5 cos 30 theta is going to be 5 times cos theta is 0.28, which is going to be, it's 1.4 newtons. So another forward force in X direction is plus 1.4 newtons. ये forward forces हो गई in X direction और backward force यहाँ कोई भी नहीं है. इधर कोई backward force नहीं है क्योंकि the three components of forces that we see उनमें कोई भी backward component नहीं आ रहा. So it's going to be minus 0 whole square, which gives 6.1 plus 1.4 squared is 56.25. This is the Rx. Check. Okay. Ry के लिए we're going to do forward force in y direction minus backward force in y direction. Okay. Forward force तो वो जो upward force है 4.8 newtons और backward force भी 4.8 newton है. So 4.8 newton because they're in opposite direction. So Ry is 0. So then the resultant is going to be 56.25 squared plus 0 squared, which gives 56.25. I think मैंने ना ये स्क्वायरिंग गलत किया है क्योंकि मेरा आंसर नहीं ठीक आ रहा है. यहाँ कुछ गड़बड़ हुई है. It can't be 56.25. Let me check. 6.1 plus 1.4 आंसर का स्क्वायर करना है तो यही आता है 56.25. And when I underroot this, I'm getting 7.5. Okay, sorry. It's correct. When we अच्छा, आफ्टर स्क्वायरिंग मैंने यहाँ मुझे यहाँ स्क्वायर नहीं करना चाहिए था, ये गलती हो रही है। यहाँ पे नहीं स्क्वायर करते आर एक्स निकालते वक्त, वो तो रिजल्टेंट निकालते वक्त स्क्वायर करते हैं। सो 6.1 प्लस 1.4 से आता है 7.5 एक्चुअली। ओके, फिर हम आर एक्स को जब स्क्वायर करेंगे तो हम 7.5 को स्क्वायर करेंगे। आई वाज स्क्वायरिंग ट्वाइस, which was wrong. Okay, so this gives 7.5 newtons. Now the answer is correct. R is coming out to be 7.4 न्यूटन्स। और इसकी डायरेक्शन देख लेते हैं। वैसे तो हमें नजर ही आ गया कि y कंपोनेंट कैंसिल आउट हो रहे हैं, तो जो r है वो x की डायरेक्शन में ही है, दैट इज 6.1 न्यूटन्स। बट लेट्स आल्सो प्रूव इट। tan थीटा इज इक्वल्स टू आर वाई अपॉन आर एक्स। तो आर वाई तो है 0, तो दैट मीन्स tan थीटा इज इक्वल्स टू 0, और फिर थीटा इज इक्वल्स टू 0 डिग्रीज। When you take tan inverse of 0, that's 0. That means resultant का कोई angle ही नहीं. It's 0 degree angle, so it is where it is, in the direction of 6.1 Newton force. So the direction is in the direction of 6.1 Newton force. In direction of 6.1 Newton force. Okay. Let's take a look at the next part. Next part is, given that the block is in limiting equilibrium, for limiting equilibrium, we need to use the formula friction is equals to mu r. अच्छा जी, अब जो फ्रिक्शन है that's going to be the same as r, जो हमने बिल्कुल शुरू में बात की थी. So that is equals to 7.5 newtons. So friction is 7.5. Mu हमने शायद find करना है. Find the coefficient of friction. Yes, mu is this. R is the normal contact force. So is either there's a weight given to you. Weight is 12.5 newtons. So R is going to be upward. So R is 12.5 newtons. Okay, so R is 12.5 newtons. Find mu from here, which comes 7.5 over 12.5 is 0.6. Achari. The force of magnitude 6.1 Newton is now replaced by a force of magnitude 8.6 Newtons acting in the same direction, and the block begins to move. Find the magnitude and the acceleration of the block. Okay. So now the 6.1 Newton force is changing and it's becoming bigger. That is 8.6 Newtons. So now that means the equilibrium will break and the block will move in the forward direction of the new force 8.6 Newton. So हमने acceleration find करनी है, so we're going to use the formula forward force minus backward force equals ma. Okay, so now we need the new resultant, I mean the new forward force. So that is going to be फॉरवर्ड फोर्स जो है वो अगेन आर एक्स ही होगी, द न्यू आर एक्स, क्योंकि जैसे कि हमने पहले देखा 4.8 न्यूटन अपवर्ड है और 4.8 न्यूटन ही डाउनवर्ड्स है, तो वो तो एक दूसरे को कैंसिल कर रहे हैं. सो फॉरवर्ड फोर्स इज जस्ट द आर एक्स फोर्स because ry is 0 in this question as we've already seen. So अब नया rx निकालते हैं. बैकवर्ड फोर्स क्या है? अब फ्रिक्शन है, सो माइनस फोर्स ऑफ फ्रिक्शन इज इक्वल्स टू मास है 1.25 और ए हमने निकालना है. ओके, फ्रिक्शन भी हमें पहले से पता है, फ्रिक्शन है 7.5. So friction minus 7.5. So now we only need Rx. Okay, Rx is going to be, इस पे वापस जाते हैं फिगर पे. चलिए, सो एक तो 6.1 न्यूटन फोर्स अब रिप्लेस हो गई है विद अ न्यू फोर्स, बिगर फोर्स विच इज 8.6 न्यूटन. तो एक तो 8.6 न्यूटन फोर्स है, और एक ये वाला जो कंपोनेंट है, इट्स गोइंग टू स्टे अनचेंज 1.4 ही है, क्योंकि द अदर फोर्स इज द सेम. जो 5 न्यूटन फोर्स है वो तो नहीं चेंज हुई, थीटा तो नहीं चेंज हुआ. सो इट्स स्टिल 1.4 न्यूटन्स इन द एक्स डायरेक्शन. सो हम कर लेंगे 8.6 प्लस 1.4, दैट्स द एक्स फोर्स. और अगेन वाई फोर्स जीरो है, क्योंकि अप डायरेक्शन में भी 4.8 न्यूटन है और डाउन डायरेक्शन में भी 4.8 न्यूटन है, तो हमें आर वाई की जरूरत ही नहीं है, वो जीरो है. सो आर एक्स इज क्या थी, 8.6 and 1.4 added. 8.6 plus 1.4. Okay. That is 10 minus 7.5 equals 1.25a. Find a from here. A is 2 meters per second square. Any questions?